Guys, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the unit comparison now, at long last, of our Out of Gallia banner. As you guys may or may not know, this video will focus on some very specific details, mostly looking at the new units, their stat spreads and roles, and how that compares, keyword, compares to older units in the current game. Now, I wanted to preface this by saying that beast units themselves are actually fairly difficult to compare other units to because they are their own archetype. This means that beasts, all these beasts here, stand on their own and carry kind of different roles completely because they should be used along other beasts. And if you invest fully into a beast team, then that's where you should be using these units. However, as most of these units tend to be 5-star exclusive, and especially with some of the beasts from the Fates banner not even being demoted, you're still limited in a lot of team comp options, merges, and long-term investments in general without spending thousands of orbs. So it's very important to look at some of the old units and consider what team comps and roles they do in the top level meta of Fire Emblem Heroes in general, which of course that's what all these videos look at. We're going to look at objective analysis and of course from a budget perspective as possible for tier 21 plus ether raids all the way up to tier 27 where what I play, where you see a diverse amount of strategies that you can use these units if you intend to use beasts or their comparable budget options or alternative investments. Finally, I won't be looking at the mathematics at the end of this video because there were some pool changes, so I haven't prepared the math changes yet. I still need to source and find that myself, so I apologize in advance if you look for the math at the end. We will just go over it as a kind of like a summary and an estimation as to how much you can look to spend. So that'll be kind of like the whole should you pull. Of course, as I mostly say in these videos, no, you won't pull because we have other options in the game and you'd never feel like you need these sort of units. I've already gone over what I thought of most of the units in yesterday's skills and unit impressions video, and a lot of that still applies. So definitely go take a look at that if you haven't already. Legendary mythic banners in the future will always provide better value, and that's where all your orbs will go for. Finally, let's get into it, shall we? So, Ranulf is here as our first unit to look at. His stat spread looks, remember, cavalry, looks pretty good. Actually fairly unique, kind of, when it comes to cavalry green units because it's fast, high defense, and decent attack. So the most notable comparison, of course, that we have, especially in the 3- and 4-star pool, is actually Groom Marth. And a pretty good one at that. Actually, their speed difference is very little. If you actually consider that Groom Marth can have a refined slaying axe, he's kind of a better Gale Force unit. And melee Gale Force units, cavalry specifically, are meant to have this role right now in ether raids. If you're going to use a cav, it should be for Gale Force. They don't really have much more of a role than this. You could potentially use them on AR defense in a similar manner, or maybe rally traps to really do some destruction that way. But if you use these guys on AR offense, that's how you do it. I want to give a notable shout out to Ranulf for having some support capabilities, which is what I'll go into next. But yeah, Groom Marth, green cav, you probably already have some calves invested into already. If you don't have Reinhardt or Brave Lynn and you need yourself someone who's quick and does the green Gale Force role pretty well, then that's what Marth does, and he's got the speed to match for that. Remember, a lot of these units on the left can of course be merged up, and that gives them a pretty good advantage. Somebody like Ranulf, for instance, as another comparison, to get a consistent 4-charge Gale Force requires either Quick Impulse in the seal, or you may need to use someone like Valoria or Ostia's Pulse on Hector, which would kind of ruin the team comp, plus using Heavy Blade in the A slot. So it's not as good. And his weapon itself tends to favor other units, which can work, like nearby, can work with Gale Forces where you have the other unit do it first, and then he comes in and gets a little bit of a boost that way. But generally speaking, Ranulf is in kind of a weird position where you can already use other options to perform that role. So moving on, and I wanted to of course touch on that whole supportive role. If you decide to maybe use a cav to support, Groom Marth actually comes with decent support options out of the box, which is his Ardent Service for buffing attack, Then he comes with drive attack in the C slot, drive speed, and he has enough defense that you could just give him an A slot to potentially soak chill defense, or speed 3, which could soak chill speed when using him on AR offense. You could use smite instead of reposition. The special is not very relevant, and you have yourself a decent support character, just like Ranulf would do for beast teams. So again, if you already have your cavalry units invested, Grumarth is that comparable option. Okay, I wanted to give a notable shout out to a Gale Force unit that may not be considered too often, because Wolfburg itself, and a lot to do with how Gale Force units perform, is they tend to go in by themselves, and that actually works really well with somebody like Walhart, because he generally will be Gale Forcing in by himself. The problem, of course, is you are forced to bump up his speed in one manner or another. You basically are forced to use like Darting Blow or invest heavily with merges and flowers or some extensive speed support. If you have like attack speed solo, for instance, in the A slot, that might work really well. He also may have some issues with one-shotting because his attack is too high, so that's why Darting Blow might actually be good instead of attack speed solo. Some of the AR offense inconsistencies that come with Gale Force is literally that. You end up one-shotting and not proccing Gale Force because you didn't double. And that's why stuff like Curtains and Valoria and Quick Impulse and whatnot, even Grand Scratchers, end up making those Gale Force comps work. But yeah, Walhart is definitely a good consideration for that if you already have an invested one instead of, let's say, Grumarth. Moving on is Lethe, or Lethe, whatever that might be. Lethe is interesting. I feel out of the beasts, she definitely is the most unique. Ranulf has a comparison, which was Caden, and Caden kind of supports better and can also honestly do the Gale Force strat himself. So Ranulf's in kind of a weird spot. But yeah, Lethe is, as a new unit, is very interesting because her weapon does really work out with Gale Force. So if you do create your beast comps and you want to run with Gale Force, with like Valoria for instance, then she's going to do it really well. She's going to appreciate, rather than using her speed defense solo in A, probably Heavy Blade and like Quick Impulse Seal, and her weapon already provides her with the attack speed solo. She's got a good stat spread for it. So honestly, good unit for that aspect. But of course, if you don't have your invested beasts, and if you consider merges and flowers some comparable options, then yeah, you run into units that you may already have in your barracks that can do similar jobs. So we got Elwood on the left here. Elwood is running his Blazing Durandal, which has Heavy Blade built in, which helps him out to use things like Life and Death in the A instead of Heavy Blade, and Quick Impulse to make sure he gets that 4-charge Gale Force right away. So when he doubles, he gets it. And doubling is the most important thing. You pretty much have to use Honed Cavalry. Attack Speed Solo is probably really good here too. And Speed Smoke will help him double maybe a quicker target that he otherwise wouldn't. But yeah, Elwood, still really good for this. Probably still the best red when it comes to Gale Force strategies. If your Quick Impulse Seal ends up being taken already, then of course, a other option is Seth. And if you already have a plus speed Seth that might have been supporting and you want to try using him as a Gale Force unit, then yeah, his stat spread is 32-31, I believe. So this is why Seth kind of does that. Cain is also another one, but he just got a weapon refine, and I don't really recommend merging him as it is because Wings of Mercy 3 is really good. Seth, for instance, you don't really hurt too much by merging. He only has like 4 defense 3. Elwood, same idea. Maybe Ward Cav might be really important for some sort of defense teams later on. But generally speaking, like these two units are mergeable, flowerable, and therefore get some pretty decent stat spreads and combine really well with Calves that you may have already invested in, rather than having to think about using these beasts without having already so many options. So moving on, Mordecai. And Mordecai is awesome. Really awesome. Full immersion, actually. This guy is really tanky, slow, smite, supportive. All the kind of things that I actually thought about when I played my Path of Radiance file. So yeah, that's awesome. His weapon also really does do that supportive nature, which I talked about in my previous impressions video. And when you think about Mordecai, and he's an infantry beast, of course you probably want to use him on a beast team, but you don't have to use him on a beast team, and that's what I think I can appreciate, because him transforming is not really that relevant. If you use him to support, he can actually fit into most comps, and that's why if he gets demoted, or even if you pick him up, you don't have to necessarily feel bad about having to invest in all these beasts and whatnot, tanking or Gale Force comps just to make him work. So as a kind of like a one-off, he's interesting in that aspect. But there are already support options that you may already be using or should consider using an AR offense, for instance, which is first up Odin, the original Smite Master himself. It's unfortunate that Defense Reslink is not an available fodder yet. It might be in the future, where that would be really good on his B slot, so you can buff 6 to all stats from a Smite. But yeah, Odin at least gives attack speed, which is very useful for maybe Gale Force or hit and runs, where you want to just snipe something with the appropriate stats. And Odin surprisingly has a really good HP stat, which most people kind of laughed at initially, but reaching 57 HP with an HP boon and then just using HP A and Seal with Panic Point and C, yeah, it works out really well. The dude does reach 67 speed, 67 HP with one merge, 67 HP with 2 airs, for instance, or 2 Astras in the future. So very good support unit for that role. His attack and speed isn't actually as bad as it looks from here, because of the fact that he uses a Blade Tome. So if you end up maybe using Smite on him, or Drawback or something, Reposition, he ends up having 54 attack and 39 speed. So he himself ends up doing pretty decent, at least if you wanted him to engage in some combat here and there. And yeah, remember, AR offense does limit your team slots. Eventually, the ideal way to use them is like 2 airs, 2 Astras of bonus unit and whatnot. So you got to consider the support unit you bring in here. Corin, Odin, and of course, what most people should use, Aversa. Depending on how you look at it, but Aversa has the overall big chills and panics all over the place. So I use her plenty, I have her merged up, and as always, based on my Grail video, if you've seen that, I always recommend using Aversa. Like, Aversa is so versatile, carries so many team comps, completely neuters a lot of AR defense teams. People do not want to use buffs because Aversa is a thing. Like, she is just that good. Again, it depends totally on your team comp though. For instance, if you use flyers like I do, you don't want to be using stuff like Defense Tactic. You may not require attack Reslink, for instance, if you use Legendary Azura as a dancer that could be providing Hone Attack 4 plus Prayer Wheel, whatever you might be. So the B and C are fairly flexible. For instance, I use Ward Flyers. B skill could be like, I use Flyer Formation. You could use Renewal. There's plenty of stuff there that can flex with this sort of thing. But Smite is definitely one thing that I always consider at least having one unit here. If one of your heirs don't run Smite, then Aversa could run Smite, or she could run Drawback. So kind of the similar role we're talking about here with Mordecai. If you don't use Aversa, if you don't use Odin, then Mordecai could also fit into these roles, and Mordecai could actually be pretty good, depending on how his weapon works exactly. I hypothesized yesterday that where a unit ends their turn, they end up just debuffing everything around, like a Smoke Dagger effect. Of course, that competes with Aversa directly, so you don't use both of them, you use one of them. And of course, Mordecai would fit in better in a beast comp. So again, you don't really want to use Aversa because you may deny some transformations on a character, on like a beast comp. And that's really what it comes down to. Beasts should stick with beasts and dragons, and everyone else should hang out in their own cool club. We're just totally segregating these two things. And that's why when we're talking about these unit comparisons as a whole, you got to think of what units you're already using, which ones you've already invested into, and consider which support unit works well. But the beauty is Mordecai can work out of the beasts, and that's why he's really good. So next up is probably the big one that most people are talking about, and yeah, he's pretty big. But realistically speaking, this guy is no laughing matter, because as I touched in the unit impressions video, this guy is definitely impactful. If you just give him Fallen Shield in A, he's already good to go out of the box. Of course, you make some minor changes. Maybe instead of Vengeful, you could use Special if you have it. Attack Smoke is really good in C, Fierce Stance and Seal. You could have so many, plenty of options. The problem at the end of the day, though, is that mobility, and the mobility has to be played around with either an Armored Dragon giving him Armor March, which actually, by the way, I highly don't recommend, because then you would have that Armored Dragon maybe exposed to end turn beside Mufasa, and that would be bad because that unit might get sniped. So the ideal way of using this guy is what I mentioned, Raisin with Guidance, That's the best case scenario. Maybe Naesala with guidance, maybe Tibarn, maybe Leanne. That you need to like consider these sort of situations. Valoria's, Cadence, you have to put him in a beast comp for him to properly be used. Because if he doesn't transform, he doesn't get that distant counter effect. And that's everything that he's based around. You cannot use him otherwise. And if you try to fit him into these awkward mixed team comps, I just don't see it working. And that's a big problem. That's basically what it is. Armor doesn't require the armor march. It doesn't require that mobility, but his beast transformations are required. And therefore, that's going to be the thing that makes it weird to use. You can't just pick him up without some sort of investment into a beast comp. And that's what's going to make him difficult to use. Finally, the closest comparison that I'm going to want to suggest to people that don't use Mufasa is, of course, Winter Cecelio. Colorless, easily merged through the Grail system, and generally speaking, fulfills a similar-ish role that is outside of Beasts, only because the current AR meta is mostly range damage. So Running's Fallen Shield gets those pesky Micaiahs out of there, Dancing Micaiahs, all those things are out of there. You can use Cecelio here to basically just take all those nukes that you may have encountered through infantry pulse teams and deal back some decent damage there, especially maybe running with like M. Corrin or Caden or something like that to provide the support needed for Winter Cecelio to secure those kills. So of course, an alternative to that is like Glimmer instead of Noontime. But again, this is going to do it pretty well. Cecelio optimally prefers Special Fighter and Lethal Carrot with like close counter maybe. But again, the lacking of Fallen Shield could really make some matches really difficult, especially when you consider pre-charged Micaiahs with Luna or Dancing Micaiahs, Don Suzu with Lunas. It gets pretty tricky for her to tank those things. And of course, the inability to even counterattack melee can definitely mess things up, or even Null Seas. Like you can't use Null Seas, so Fire Sweep ends up being a problem. Lunges, dragbacks into lightning traps. There's definitely some problems with, and that doesn't just apply to Cecelio, it applies to Lion King over here himself. But yeah, generally speaking, if you haven't invested in Winter Cecelio, I do recommend it. Astra, light, good solid unit. I've covered this in my Omega tanking video. Winter Cecelio was one of the subjects there that I recommend for people if you don't already have like a Mega Tank flyer that I've covered before. Anyways, moving on. Okay, now that that's over, we are looking at Jerome. And by the way, Jerome is no better than... Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like after we just looked at Worse Navarre from Rutger, we're now looking at Worse Shershi. Quite a disappointment, especially for Haar fans, especially for a free unit. You would think with so many unique and interesting units that are on a banner that they might give you something comparable as a free unit. I don't see what the correlation is between the Gallia beasts and Haar. Maybe because Haar is technically an enemy at first? I don't know, man. Whatever. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to look at Haar as objectively as I can, but realistically, the TLDR of this is Haar is already not doing anything different than what Shershi and Jerome already do. If you already had Jerome at 5-star, which you probably did if you've been playing a while, there's absolutely no reason at all to spend 20k feathers on Haar. Literally not a single reason, if you already had a 5-star Jerome, why you would 5-star Haar. That's as simple as that. Literally, that's all it is. However, if you're like me, and you got to invest in him because he's an arena bonus unit or an AR bonus unit, then yeah, you're probably going to spend feathers reluctantly. At least you won't feel bad about merging merging good fodder, because honestly, guard and odd defense wave are not really the most elusive of, or exclusive, or that great of fodders as it is, with silence being 3-star and even defense wave being a thing. It's whatever. Like, Haar doesn't bring anything. In fact, he comes with Brave Axe, the same weapon as Shershi, who you may have like tens of copies of right now. we're going to talk about what Cecelio and Jerome and technically Haar kind of do as a supportive role, if you want to consider that as a thing. So on the left here, we have Cecelio running what I consider G-Duel instead of HP 5 as an arena build. Cecelio, in my opinion, is actually the best unit to bring for arena as a green dual flying support, at least in the 3 and 4 star pool, with Cam potentially being also an option, and Racing. Unfortunately for Racing, you do score less using Dance. So guidance support, chill attack, and like panic ploy, of course, is like the ideal kind of supportive unit, and she does that really well. So you already have that flex there, and Haar can't even do this because he doesn't have panic on his weapon, unless you use Legion's Axe or something like that. But yeah, flyers are really good for this because of guidance. Moving on, if you do intend to use her on like a flyer ball, this is covered in the AR defense videos. I don't recommend using Cecelio or even Haar for AR offense. They don't really fit into a proper role right now. That you could maybe do some Gale Force shenanigans or something, but I don't feel that's the right way to do it. Flyer balls, especially for someone like Cecelio, is the right place to put her right now. Right now, you're going to see a Dark Blessing with Yoon providing actually an additional 1 speed on top of what's seen there. She should have 32 speed. So with attack speed bond, you're looking at 37. Potentially, if you have drive speed as well, it could be up to 40 speed. And with attack res bond and a bunch of ward flyers around her, she actually reaches about 39 res, or potentially up to 42, depending on what other support you have. So this actually becomes really hard to snipe from a frontliner for Cecelio, which is extremely good, because her offensive power is insane. So not only are you providing panic ploy support, but you are threatening units really well. Gale Force isn't actually required there in the special. I think even like Escutcheon or maybe even Bonfire could be also pretty good. It's just that's definitely a flex slot. If you've seen the bunch of power that S does, Cecelio does it just as good without the effective damage that S provides. So yeah, and because of flyer formations, the bonds end up synergizing really well. You have a good speed stat if you consider using her with Yoon. If you don't and you use her maybe with air, she can bump up the res and then focus on speed instead with like attack, speed bond, A, and seal, which yeah, it gives you some really good power out of a flyer ball. It's not even comparable with Haar or Jerome. Like Cecelio is just objectively better on a flyer ball, hands down. And if you were a mad lad to even consider maybe using Haar or Jerome on a flyer ball for AR defense, I'll humor you. There it is. I'm not even going to try to justify this one. Just, you know what? I might do it. I might do it for 2 weeks. And maybe I'll give you guys some footage of it. Maybe. Maybe for like a +2 Haar for his bonus weeks on AR defense. I don't know. I might do it. We'll see. Either way, that pretty much sums up my unit comparison analysis video for today. To give you a TLDR, guys, Mordecai may get demoted, so don't summon in blue. Lion King is better off summoned later through Mythic or Legendary banners, especially if he shares with like Air for merges or Duma, maybe, or whatever Legendary like F Grima or the new one that might come out this month are all good ideas to snipe for with Lion King later if you intend to go for beast comps. If you don't even have the proper tools to make a beast comp, you definitely don't need Lion King. Absolutely not. You may just find him frustrating to use, if anything. Everyone else, again, fits in nicely with their kind of like prescribed role in a beast comp, but not necessarily needed. Like, you don't need Lethe or Ranulf by any means. Caden would be nice. Mordecai would be nice off beast comps, for instance. But yeah, you don't really need them at all. And I probably Beast XP probably won't. If there's a demote, it would probably be him. So yeah, kind of an interesting banner overall. I mean, it's really impactful because people who do invest highly are going to get a lot of value out of this banner, but people who don't and just look at your budget options in general are not really going to get too much out of this. So, you know, are you really ready to spend 200 to 400 orbs for one copy of this unit, which does get outperformed by units in the 3 and 4 star pool, when you also consider you got to spend another 400, 600, 800 orbs, who knows how many, just to create a proper comp where they will somewhat function, and then in the long term, you got to save even more orbs to make them work? No, I don't see it happening. Maybe with more free GHB Tempest Trials units that are beasts, we can revisit these units and create some really solid team comps. But for the time being, wait it out. See what the banner overlaps with, create a better, educated, good decision that way. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Give the video a thumbs up, sub to the channel if you haven't already. Please let me know in the comments below how you intend to maybe save or use these units if you intend to. What do you think of Haar? Do you love Haar as much as I do? I actually did like Haar a lot, and I probably will use them. But that's pretty much my end of the story here. I'll see you guys in the next video. Weapon Refine video coming up maybe in a day or two. I know some people will definitely ask me about that. See y'all tomorrow, guys. Peace!